And we're back with yet another list of top 10 evil people from history we really wish we could forget. We should never forget our history, otherwise we will be doomed to repeat it. But sometimes we hear about things and people and we just really wish we didn't. Welcome back to MA everyone, I'm your host Rachel Fisher, and today we are going to talk about some pretty horrific things, so here is your trigger warning if you want to avoid that. This is not the list for you. Viewer beware. Let's get started. Number 10. Tamerlane the Great. How about Tamerlane the not great, dude? Oh, it's so bad. Tamerlane was a great conqueror of the Turks who was infamous for building a tower of skulls. This man will make you thankful for democracy, or just like everything we have today, if you weren't already. He ruled around 40 years until he died in 1405 CE. He was a huge fan of Genghis Khan and he believed he was his descendant. He wasn't directly on his father's side, but he kind of was. And based on what we know of Genghis Khan, not hard to believe he had a lot of kids. To pay homage to his great-grandfather, he built an empire that stretched across Russia, the Mediterranean, and India. No mercy was his motto, annihilating whole cities in one fell sweep. He burned down a mosque in Damascus with people still inside just to heighten the fear. One of the most gruesome things he ever did was behead over 90,000 people, enough to build 100 towers of decaying skulls. Right? Unlike his idol Genghis Khan, his brutal campaign wasn't about protecting trade routes and flanks, but more about, bragging rights and power. The Timurid Empire didn't survive for very long because they never put in any governmental structures after they destroyed their territory, so it's kind of like once you just conquer somewhere, you have to take care of it after, but he didn't. In other words, he may have conquered many places, but he never truly ruled after he destroyed them. He killed around 19 million people, probably more, during his conquests and skinned alive any who wouldn't convert to Islam. Whew! Vicious! Vicious! Number 9. Issei Sagawa. Man, I can't believe this dude is just like walking around free. It really freaks me out. I don't want to forget this man exists at all, so if I ever see him, I can run in the opposite direction, and as should you. In 1981, Sagawa took the life of Renee Hartfeld and then he ate her. Yeah. He took 2 days to consume her, and apparently this crime had fulfilled a lifelong desire for Sagawa. He did try to get diagnosed by a psychiatrist who actually declared him highly dangerous, but because he was the son of a rich Japanese businessman, rather than getting help, his father sent him to school in Sorbonne, France. Issei apparently had the desire when he saw his classmates' thighs while at school and he thought they looked delicious. Ugh. While at school in France, he finally met his target, Renee. The two became friends, well, on her end. She had no idea what was about to happen. Thankfully, she wouldn't have realized what was about to happen as he shot her in the back, which is like a really small mercy. Ugh, I'm glad she wasn't like cognizant. He selected her because of her youth and beauty, and Issei wanted to absorb her energy so he wouldn't be as weak. He packed up what was left of her corpse into a suitcase and took a cab over to a park and dropped them off. But bystanders saw the blood leaking and called the police. He admitted it, was declared insane, as he already was, deported back to Japan where he was supposed to stay in a mental institution, but they declared him sane, and since the case was dropped in France, he only had to stay for 15 months in the institution. And he is now free, walks the streets, and says he still has the same desires. Number 8. The Killer Actor. A black mark on the profession, no doubt. Ramiro Artaida was so set on revenge and coercion that he went to acting school so he could be better at it, right? Between 1937 and 1939, Ramiro was responsible for the gruesome deaths of over 8 women. His thing was that he would create characters in order to lure women to secluded areas. His go-tos were a monk, a film producer, and a professor. The motivation behind his killing spree was related to the accusation made against him years before. Ramiro was engaged to be married and he came from a wealthy estate. He was accused of killing his older brother in order to ensure that the estate passed solely to him, and it was due to these accusations that his fiancée left him, but nothing was proven. Distraught, he fled Bolivia and studied drama in the US, only to return and exact revenge on any women who looked like his ex. Like, talk about a dramatic breakup. Thankfully, he was caught and sentenced to death in 1939. Yikes. Number 7. The Great Blood Sorceress. What a name, right? Next up, we have Magdalena Solis, who unfortunately earned the bad nickname of the Great Blood Sorceress. Why was this woman so evil? Well, she was a cult leader who manipulated and tormented her followers due to her warped sense of self. A religious fanatic with an already delusional sense of who she was, she joined the Santos Cayetano Hernandez cult in 1963 in Mexico. She traveled with the cult to Yerba Buena, a town with a tiny population of only 50 people, all sadly destitute and poor. She took severe advantage of the people, convincing them that she was the reincarnation of an Aztec goddess. Okay? I don't know if you know anything about the Aztec tradition, but whoa. The brothers who founded the group knew it was fake, but Magdalena even sold herself on the charade. She was responsible for 8 confirmed deaths, though probably more. They died due to the gruesome ritual sacrifices she performed on them. Like, think Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones, like that. That's exactly what she did. Ugh! This woman would torment and beat them, then take out their hearts and drink their blood. Like, ugh! Just horrendous. I hate this. It's just gross. Don't join cults. Anyways. Number 6. Delphine LaLaurie. It was only a matter of time before Delphine LaLaurie made it onto this list, and I know you've been waiting. LaLaurie first caused suspicion over her cruelty when a servant girl threw herself off of a balcony whilst being chased by LaLaurie. But the real horrors were revealed when rescuers found a 70-year-old slave woman chained to the stove during a house fire. The woman had set the fire herself and tried to take her own life for fear her punishment would lead her to the attic. When authorities ventured up to the attic themselves, they saw several bodies of servants mutilated and hung by the neck. Needless to say, the whole town was set ablaze after that with anger. A mob surrounded the LaLaurie mansion with the desire of confronting and punishing the cruel woman, but she had disappeared. To this day, no one knows what happened to her. I mean, she's definitely dead. She was socially ruined, but as to where and how, no one knows. But she was never properly punished for her crimes. Number 5. Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm actually surprised Dahmer hasn't made it onto this list until now, but here he is. What creeps me out the most about Dahmer is his awareness that what he was doing was wrong. He just couldn't help himself. With a genius level IQ of 145, Dahmer was a ticking time bomb. His desire to mutilate started out the way you expect with animals as a young child, but prior to his rise to crime, he fell to alcohol abuse and dropped out of business school before enlisting in the US Army. According to Dahmer, he knew what he wanted to do, but he just hadn't found the opportunity. But he was discharged after attacking 2 fellow soldiers, and it was after this that he began pursuing the title of the Milwaukee Cannibal, which is what he became later. Between 1971 and 1991, he killed 17 men in a variety of gruesome ways and celebrated each and every one. One of the things he did that I wish I didn't know was he attempted to make a human zombie by drilling into his victims' heads. One of his victims escaped and notified police. When they got there, the chief medical examiner remarked it was more like dismantling someone's museum than an actual crime scene. Dahmer was killed behind bars by another inmate in 1994. Number 4. The monster of Ecatepec. Truly a monster. There are monsters in this world, as this series of lists have proven. Juan and Patricia Carlos were responsible for taking the lives of over 20 women, causing widespread panic in Mexico City in 2018. Patricia was his helper and would lure women to their home by promising them cheap clothes. Once inside, Juan would take over and severely violate them in perverse ways before taking their lives. The couple would also remove organs and feed them to their dogs. They were not picky with their victims either, making it hard for authorities to develop a pattern. They took any woman they found, even a young mother, and they tried to sell her infant she left behind. But unfortunately though, quite gruesomely, the 2 were caught when they were found pushing a stroller of body parts. Carlos warned police after his arrest that should he be released, he will do it all again, so they better listen to him. Just keep him there. Coming up to number 3, if you like this list so far, make sure to show some love, like, subscribe, comment, do your thing. It's gonna get weirder from here, so if this is too much for you, please take a moment, go for a walk, do what you need to do, and then come on back. Number 3, Andrei Chikatilo. I think the creepiest and most evil people are the ones you least expect, and that's what terrifies me about this guy. I would take a poltergeist any day over someone like Andrei. Andrei was a teacher in the Soviet Union, trusted by so many, but little did anyone know he took the lives of 50 young people before he was caught. His case actually inspired the book Child 44 by Tom Robb-Smith, which is actually one of my favorites, by the way, couldn't put it down. The reason he was able to get away with the killings for so long was because of the USSR. Crimes like this didn't exist in Stalin's Russia, so these events were often covered up at the scene, so it was easy for criminals like this to get away. Meanwhile, Andrei was addicted to taking the lives of these women, as it was the only way he could achieve satisfaction. The reason he was so pathologically messed up started in his early childhood. Stalin's agricultural policies caused widespread famine, and from part 1 we know he's not a good guy himself. But Andrei was believed to have suffered from water on the brain at birth, causing him to get frequent UTIs and often wet his bed. He was also bullied due to his father's capture in World War II because it was seen as cowardly. Whatever the cause may be, he still committed some vicious crimes, and thankfully he was arrested in the 1990s. And though we have sympathy for him, man, takes a certain kind of person to do something so horrible. And number 2, Shiro Ishi. We've talked about Mengele in a previous video, but it's time we talked about Ishi. Ishi and Mengele honestly probably would have been best friends, both having a sick fascination with cruelty and medicine. Shiro Ishi was the director of Unit 731 in the Department of Biological Weapons for the Japanese Army in World War II. What was his job? To develop an understanding of the most deadly kinds of science. How? Well, I bet you can guess. He would perform all of his experiments on prisoners of war trying to understand disease, warfare, and sickness. He would perform horrendous experiments such as injecting prisoners with diseases like anthrax and testing out biological weapons on them. His unit even performed live vivisections on prisoners, inflicting them with hypothermia, frostbite, induced strokes, and heart attacks. His cruelty resulted in the deaths of thousands of people. The war was awful, but because of him, soldiers would have rather been shot than sent to a Japanese POW camp. But the worst part is, the US pardoned him in exchange for the results of his experiments. That is absolutely shameful to me. I hate that. Number 1, Norway terror. July 2011 was a horrific day for the people of Norway after 77 people were killed by right-wing extremist Anders Breivik. At 3:26 p.m. on July 22nd, a fertilizer bomb went off outside the building of the Prime Minister. 8 people were killed. After that, Anders ventured to Utoya Island wearing a police uniform. Young adults were at a Labour Party youth camp on which Anders opened fire, taking out anyone who tried to escape. Finally, at 6:27, he was taken into custody by the Norwegian police unit. Beyond the 69 young adults whose lives were taken, 319 people were injured, and a later study showed that 1 in 4 people in Norway knew someone who had been there. This was the worst crime ever committed in Norway, and with 1 in 4 Norwegians having known someone, it hit very close to home to many of them. But the worst part about Anders is that though he admitted to the crime, he denied responsibility because the crimes were necessary. The saddest part about making these lists is that there really is no shortage of awful people in the world. The best we can do is try to be one of the good ones. If you like this video, let us know, like, subscribe, you know the deal. I've been your host, Rachel Fisher, and until next time, take care of yourselves, be good.